Welcome to Fiction Factory, the official podcast of Get Dangerous Games, creators of the Shadows tabletop RPG. I'm Scott, one of the designers for Shadows, and in this episode we're continuing our series in which we explore the many character archetypes found in the gritty and dangerous world of Night City. If you missed our last episode, which kicked off the series, I strongly encourage you to go back and check it out. Not only did I give an overview of character archetypes in general, but I spent some time looking at the human archetype, which, in our game, kind of serves as the default character. In this episode, however, we'll be diving deep into the Arcanist character archetype, discussing their strengths and weaknesses, how they manipulate magic and fit into the world of Night City, and give you some tips for playing an Arcanist effectively, or at least creatively. So, whether you're a seasoned tabletop RPG player or you're new to the genre, we think you'll find something to enjoy in this series. Buckle up, grab your dice, and get ready to explore the shadows of Night City. In our last episode, we talked about the human archetype, and like I said, it kind of serves as a default character template upon which you can build. And I mentioned a few times that one of the things a human can do is learn magic. Now, if you stay as a human archetype and you decide to use some magic and learn that, what you're doing is essentially adding an Arcanist feature or power of being able to do spellcasting. If, however, you decide from the get-go that you want to be the magic user, the spellcaster, you can choose the Arcanist archetype. Basically, what this means is that because anyone in Night City can learn how to use magic, there's a difference between a human who's picked up a few tricks and someone who has devoted their life to it, right? So an Arcanist is someone who has studied magic at the expense of normalcy. They've got an intimate knowledge of its function, its use, and the reality of it is that they can be really terrifying when they start to comprehend the ether and the world that's all around them. I should mention that ether is this concept that in our game is probably most similar to like the Force or something like that. Chi, it is this power that it effuses all of reality. It is, star stuff, that sort of thing. And what's special about the Arcanist is that they have learned through study or through accident how to manipulate this. But the difference between a human who's picked up a few tricks and the Arcanist is that they have spent a lot of time and patience to really develop these skills through practice. So when your character starts as an Arcanist archetype, they might only know a couple of little things, some small tricks and stuff like that. And as they, practice more and develop their character, they can end up wielding some really complex sorcery that sets them apart from the rest of the other players that you might encounter. And what's really nice is that they also gain the ability to react rapidly in combat situations, whereas somebody else who's not as trained might only have a few tricks up their sleeve and really have to plan everything out. Humans are the only creatures in Shadows that have the potential of being Arcanists. This is due a little bit to their physiology. Some supernatural beings have the ability to use magic, but they aren't considered Arcanists due to the fact that their magic, or their powers rather, are kind of like inborn. It's part of their DNA. So a vampire's levitation is very different from an Arcanist who is, using a spell that allows them to levitate. Vampires do it, and werewolves, do their powers through burning SFR, which is a spiritual force rating, and that is kind of like their supernatural battery that has to be recharged. Whereas an Arcanist, and the way that magic works in this world, as long as they continue to succeed in their spellcasting, they can go all day, they can go all night. When we're talking about an Arcanist, for each of these archetypes, I have in the book, the kind of their overview, their physical characteristics, what it's like to play as them, and then we go into details about, their powers, vulnerabilities, and things like that. So when we're talking about an Arcanist physically, They're human, so they'll share most of those same physical qualities as other humans, as we talked about. Between like 5 foot and 6.5 feet tall. Between 150 and 300 pounds. That sort of thing. Wide range of hair and eye colors, all of that. However, what sets Arcanists apart is that due to their prolonged exposure to the ether and their experimentation with magic, many Arcanists end up taking on additional characteristics. These could be seen as kind of mutations, but more like affectations. So you might have an Arcanist with eyes that seem to change color. Maybe they have a forked tongue. Maybe their tattoos seem to move and ripple underneath their skin a little differently than the regular human who has an animated tattoo that is more like a GIF that just goes back and forth between two positions. But either way, what is noticeable about an Arcanist versus your regular garden variety human is that they appear to have this touch of chaos and madness. They're a little more wild-eyed. It's kind of like if you notice the difference between a domesticated, bunny that you might have as a pet versus like a hare that you see out in a field. They're just a little bit more feral. So even though an Arcanist may not be as physically imposing, they're definitely intimidating when one is in your, physical presence. But either way, regardless of how you got involved as a character in being an Arcanist, you have to have been practicing, studying, and training in the mystical arts. It's the only way that any of this works. This is not something where you woke up one day and you have the ability to cast spells. There is a language to it. There's a runic script that guides the thinking and channels all of the ether into a functional purpose. This means that you had to have a mentor of some kind. It could be, a formal relationship where you meet with someone every Tuesday and Thursday from 5 to 8 p.m. and work through, beginner's book of spells sort of situation. Or it could be that you fell through a portal and woke up in the land of the Fae and you were, shown these magical ways by some arcane or supernatural creature who felt that you were worthy. But either way, Arcanists have to have been taught. They can't just come up with it all on their own. Now, that said, Arcanists can get that initial spark through a wide range of means. So like I said, if you've listened to our show before, if you've watched us play on Twitch, you'll know that right now in our third season of the game, my character is Daniel Blazington III, and he's an Arcanist. And the way that his character came to get that first inkling of magic was that, he was playing a trading card game in a tournament, and when he slammed a card down, like a fireball erupted from it. I don't really remember the exact details, but the idea was that he was so focused on it. He was focusing on the runes on the card itself. He was so passionate, and his, energy within his body was so potent that he accidentally cast a spell, which then, of course, immediately caused him to freak out, as it would, because people in Shadows in Night City aren't necessarily throwing spells around left and right. The idea here is that you have your normal day-to-day life and that folks are just living that life with their head down, trying to not get wrapped up in anybody else's nonsense. So then you've got these characters, our player characters, who are, extraordinary. They're a cut above. Nobody is flinging spells right down the middle, through Central Park. Just like there's not a vampire walking the streets, out in front of everybody. Or there's not a werewolf, running down the alleyways. All of these things are kind of happening in the shadows. And what's nice about this is, as an Arcanist, you can choose to be as out or as subtle as you would like, kind of depending on where you're starting with your campaign power level. And this is the first archetype that really looks at campaign power level and takes that into consideration. So I believe in previous episodes we've talked about campaign power level, but I'll break it down for you now if this is your first time hearing about it. In Shadows, we have, I believe, 7 different levels. So these represent kind of the overall difficulty and tier of challenge that you'll be facing, as well as how well prepared the player characters are. So you start out at street level. This is going to be like your run-of-the-mill person who has maybe a little bit of an edge over somebody else. So this will be the person who's like the kid who's like the fastest in your class or the smartest in your group. The person who has just a little bit more money or power than the rest of the folks around them. Not enough that they are, necessarily changing the world, but they just stand out a little bit. So most humans will fall into this category. And then you might have, baby vamps and werewolves who are just getting their feet wet. Someone who just got their first cybernetic implant, an arcanist who just learned their first few spells. They're going to be kind of at your street level. They're not taking on world-ending threats, right? This is, if you think about it in like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this would be more like your, Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Punisher level of folks. Maybe they're street level, maybe they're a little higher to the mildly heroic or heroic level, right? Those are the next tiers, but they're certainly not facing off toe-to-toe with Thanos, King, like any of these big cosmic threats. So like I said, you've got street level, then it moves up to mildly heroic, and then heroic. And then you get into the kind of scary side of things, where you have Shadows, Dark World, Shadows Heroic, and then finally World coming down. The difference that this means for an Arcanist is they get a stat bonus based on where they are starting in a campaign power level. So most likely when you start your own campaign, you'll start between street level and heroic, right? In those first 3 tiers. And what that means is that you get a bonus, 1d4 at street level, that you can apply to your intelligence, your cool, and your empathy. It doesn't mean that you roll 1d4 for each of those. It means that you'll roll 1d4, you'll get some points, and you can put them into those pockets of intelligence, cool, and empathy. These are really important stats for an Arcanist because they directly influence your ability to cast spells. When you move up to mildly heroic, it's 1d4 plus 1. When you move to heroic, you get 2d4, right? This is just extra points that you can add onto your stats, showing that you're rising to that challenge. What's nice here, too, is that this increases your tolerance, which is your ability to sustain after you have failed in your spellcasting. It gives you an increase to your disciplines being evocation, enchantment, and alchemy, which are all elements of spellcasting. And then what's really nice is that this also adds to your baseline number of spells that you know right when you start your character. So if you're starting out at street level, you start with 1d4 plus your tolerance score of spells. And as I mentioned, tolerance is one of the stats that helps with spellcasting. Ultimately, tolerance determines how well you can keep on trucking after you have failed with a spell. So tolerance is calculated by your bod bonus plus your intelligence bonus plus your cool bonus plus 1. So it's always going to be at least 1, even if you don't have anything good in those stats. But tolerance being your ability to withstand failure, and then starting out with a bonus to your tolerance if you're a heroic character, means that you're kind of getting this reinforced edge when it comes to spellcasting. Now, some of the features of the Arcanists that really make them stand out is aberrations. So all Arcanists have a few aberrations. These are changes to the fundamental nature of their body and psyche that allows them, the first that they have is resonance, right? This allows them to detect the naturally occurring ethereal radiation that is emitted by everything. It's this effusive force that they see when they're casting spells, but also they can see it coming off of magical objects or certain creatures. So one Arcanist looking at another might see this kind of wispy aura kind of around them. It's somewhere between light and vapor almost. They also have a mystical awareness, which, like I said, lets them get a mechanical bonus of +5 to any awareness check to detect magic or magical devices that are in their vicinity. So they can't, necessarily know what an object is doing, but they can look at two different items and know which one is magical, or at least have a much better chance of knowing which one is magical. And then finally, they have arcane attunement. And this is what sets an Arcanist mostly apart from any other type of creature who might do magic, is that because they are so attuned to ether, they can channel the ether directly. It's not coming from their body. Casting spells doesn't cost any SFR. So while a werewolf or a vampire or custom character of your choosing may be able to create spell-like effects, they are doing that by essentially burning their life force. An Arcanist, however, has opened themselves up as a conduit to the ether and is able to channel the ether through their body. And like I said, if they're successful in their spellcasting, they can go all day. They can launch fireball after fireball. They can melt two objects together. They can seal a door shut, open a portal, channel lightning from the sky, all of these different things. And as long as they continue to succeed, they have no problem. They can go all night. There's no mana. There's no SFR for them to worry about. The other things about Arcanists, which are pretty cool, are these unique aberrations. So we talked about the, innate aberrations that apply to all Arcanists: resonance, mystical awareness, and the ability to cast spells. But then we have these unique aberrations. So these are things that you choose to apply to your character, and it helps separate you from other Arcanists you might encounter. You get a number of unique aberrations based on your campaign power level. So first we have Arcane Fortitude, which means that your mind is a little more tolerant. You gain a +2 bonus to tolerance, meaning that you are familiar enough with the cosmic forces that you manipulate that when it fails, it doesn't hurt you quite as much. There's also Unshakable Mind, which gives you a bonus to any sanity check that you're making. And you've gained this by your experience peering through the veil and encountering the terrifying realities of the world itself. Then you have Thaumaturgical Sight. This is an aberration which connects you with all of the different aspects of spellcasting. So it lets you kind of see the threading of a weave of a spell chain, whether it's one that you're casting or someone else is casting. And the mechanical benefit of this is that you gain a bonus for any occult check of +2, which is really cool. Occult is one of the unique skills to our system that is basically whenever anything is really out there, supernatural, magic-y, you can do an occult check to try and understand it better. The next aberration we have is the Ethereal Link. And this one is really fun from a gameplay perspective because it really involves you working with your game master, your GM, to understand what's going on. Basically, you are so linked to the cosmos that when animals are close to you, you're able to understand them at a telepathic level. So this lets you hear the thoughts of those creatures around you based on the strength of your will score. And if you succeed on a will essence check, you gain the ability to communicate telepathically with another creature as long as you're maintaining concentration. So you can imagine how useful this could be, tapping, a rat or a bird or something as a scout for you to go check out what's inside this building, to be able to communicate with, another person on your team without having to use comms, all of those things. Very fun from a gameplay perspective. Then you've got Resonant Whispers, and this is, we talked about before, being able to detect magic, or getting a bonus to detect magic as one of your innate aberrations. Resonant Whispers is an add-on to that. You gain a +3 bonus to any occult check to discern the properties of any charm, talisman, or artifact. So these are items that have been created using an Arcanist spellcasting ability, either through evocation, enchantment, or alchemy. These are items that have been physically imbued with magic. And by having Resonant Whispers as one of your selected unique aberrations, you gain the ability to discern what exactly those properties are. So is this a Spell Eater charm that's going to absorb any botches in my spellcasting? Is this a magic sword that can talk and think and fly through the air? Anything and everything in between. And then the last unique aberration we have is Etheric Magnetism. Basically, this is like an add-on to being lucky. It's kind of like as if destiny was watching out for you and just giving little nudges in your favor. The benefit here is that when you want, you roll a percentile dice. If you get under a 35 on your roll, meaning you've got a 35% chance, you will get a small boon, or you'll find something that gives just a little +1 bonus to all your general and utility skill checks for the rest of the encounter. So this is kind of like the universe slightly tilting in your favor. Very fun idea. This is like, something, a tool breaks and you manage to find the replacement, or you're trying to figure out what the password is and a little paper flutters in that has something written on it that jogs your memory. Real fun stuff there, and great gameplay potential between an Arcanist and a GM. So next I want to talk about the powers, and we really talked about all of these kind of innate and unique aberrations that are built in. Those are baked into the Arcanist. Nobody can copy those. So a human that's trying to learn more about magic, they don't take on those unique aberrations. That is special just for Arcanists. It's what sets them apart from other people who might cast spells. The Arcanist's official power is spellcasting. So this is the ability that lets you learn the 3 disciplines, evocation, enchantment, and alchemy, and what lets you learn the ability to cast spells. So spells are kind of theoretical concepts that you are writing out or creating, the language of what you want to exist in the world. And then how successful you are in spellcasting is how successful you will that thing into being. In most cases, it'll probably be a fireball, lightning bolt, something like that you'll use in a combat setting. But as I said, you can create charms and talismans and these other things if you have powerful enough spellcasting ability. Now, unlike vampires and werewolves, which we'll talk about later, Arcanists don't have any forms, and they don't have any vulnerabilities because, again, they are innately human. They're not shape-shifting. They're not supernatural. However, Arcanists, because of their exposure to the ether and their ability to, channel all of that, they may take on mutations. Like I said, changing eye colors and stuff like that. When spellcasting goes bad, sometimes it can cause a ripple effect that might make you grow another arm, or badly scar your face or something like that. So even though Arcanists don't start out with any forms, through their exposure to the ether, spellcasting, things like that, they definitely can take on shapes of natural, supernatural, or otherworldly creatures at a later date. When we talked earlier about, in our previous episode, we talked about milestones. This is the last thing that we're going to cover in our Arcanist episode, but Arcanist milestones are pretty cool. As an Arcanist player, one of the things that I'm experiencing as we go through the game is leveling my character up, essentially, and learning these milestones. What I love is that milestones really help set you apart from other characters who might be of the same archetype. So my character, Danny, and the campaign that we're playing through is he's the only spellcaster, and they're doing a lot of kind of interdimensional sort of actions. So some of the milestones that you'll see available to you as major milestones really focus in on this area. And depending on how you're playing that character, you can choose to focus in on, never failing when you're casting spells. So we've got etheric potency, which gives you a bonus to your spell casting. We have power transfer, which lets you take on a penalty in one area in order to boost your spell power in another area. We've got mystic conditioning, which means that you're not exhausted as easily when you're doing all this prolonged spell casting. Right, so we have these sorts of things, and then we have some that Danny has picked up, which is planar intuition. This gives you a bonus when you're navigating through other planes or trying to find portal gates. You also can pick up things like cosmic knowing, which enhances your knowledge and your ability to discern the magical world around you. And then what I really like, there's many milestones here, but the one I'll leave you with is unburnable. This started out originally as an advantage that players could get, and this is before we had the milestone system developed. We ended up shifting unburnable to be the, I guess, capstone, the top tier milestone for an Arcanist. And basically, the universe is your playground, and your spell casting no longer triggers any ruptures or cascades. When you normally would suffer a penalty with the cascade, instead you're just doubly exhausted. So you no longer have to worry about failing and accidentally ripping apart reality and yourself in the process, which I think is the ultimate goal of anyone who is doing spell casting, to be able to wield this nearly infinite cosmic power without any threat of physical harm to themselves. So that's the Arcanist deep dive. I hope that you are as excited to play an Arcanist character as I am. I'm loving it right now, playing in our weekly games on Twitch. If you want to watch us play, I recommend checking us out, twitch.tv/decode, which is D33KODE. You can also follow along with our progress in creating our core rulebook and developing the game at shadowsrpg.com. And then if you're interested in some of the other stuff that we're working on, our other gameplay videos, or other podcast episodes, you can feel free to check us out at getdangerous.net. This is Scott, and I'm signing off. Thank you for listening.